Now it's time to query our API for the postal code and act upon the result. To do this, we're going to employ a JavaScript library that makes HTTP requests much easier to make and handle, and of course, use the data it returns. The library we'll be using is called Axios. It makes working with RESTful APIs, that means APIs that you interact with through regular web requests, much more pleasant. It's a small and focused library, and I use it a lot. It's already added to the index.html file for this project. Let's just jump all the way down to the bottom. As you can see, here it is. It's installed in the lib folder for this chapter. If you're following along in an older browser and the example doesn't seem to work, you might need this ES6 promise file, which fills in missing features of certain browsers. Libraries that do that are called polyfills. You can just uncomment this to use it. Let's take a look at the documentation for Axios to see how we're going to make that request to the API. What we're going to be doing is an HTTP GET. That's what it's like when you just make a regular request in a URL, like this one. And I have some example code here. So it's axios.get, and then the URL that you want to query. And here we have then, catch, and finally. Requests like this can take time, so you don't want to lock up your pages waiting for them. To keep the page responsive, we want to make a request like this asynchronously. If you've heard of AJAX before, the first A stands for asynchronous. We handle the data as soon as it's available, or an error happens, but let the page keep working in the meantime. This pattern that Axios is following here is the JavaScript promise API to handle asynchronous requests, which means that we can chain on these methods like then and catch to handle the initial request and any errors that come up. It's nicely readable and it performs well. So let's copy all of this. We'll bring it over to our script file. Here where I'm supposed to be making the query, I'll paste this in. Now, of course, we want to be querying our API. It's actually on the same server, so I can address it as /API, and then pass in that zip code, which is up here. And here we have the then method, which is going to fire when that request is successful. So we're going to log out that response. Might as well just let it do that. And we'll see what happens. We also have an error handler down here that I hope we just won't need. Okay, we'll save that, switch back to the browser, and try it. I'll fill in another zip code here. Let's try 10023. And I'll open up my console to see what I got back. So I have a configuration object here. My zip is kind of strangely formatted, so I'll bet this didn't work. Yep, postal code invalid. Let's double check how we phrased this. Yep, that should be zip equals that zip code. So we'll save that, refresh. My zip code is still filled in, so I'll just let that blur event fire. There we go. Now we have some data to work with. So inside this response object that comes back from Axios, it has a data property, which is the actual returned data. So I'm going to use this to pull out the city and the state. So the state that we want is the abbreviation, I believe. Let's inspect this element just to make sure. Look at these states, and yep, here all the values are those abbreviations. So we'll use abbreviation for the state, and for the city, the key is probably just called city. Let's look again. Here in the console, yes, city. So we're going to have those values, and once we have successfully gotten those values, we'll want to show these fields and also set the values of those fields to the city and the state. So we'll say the city field value should be this city, and the state field should be that returned state. We'll save this and come on back. Refresh one more time. And there we go. It's working. We'll try a different zip code, 91601, North Hollywood, California. We've done it. We now allow our users to simply enter their postal code instead of having to type in all three of those fields. It's a small detail, but every few keystrokes you can save your users or customers are, in aggregate, much appreciated.